These are your controlled headlines for Saturday, July 3rd, 2021. In North Carolina, medical cannabis won near unanimous approval in an important committee hearing in the Republican-controlled General Assembly on Wednesday, the first of potentially many votes standing in the way of the plan becoming state law. It's a sign that the 22nd version of the bill could have broad support. While the votes were not officially recorded, it appears that every Democrat voted for it, as did all but 2 or 3 Republicans. The bill's sponsor is Republican Senator Bill Rabone, an influential committee chairman.
I can tell you that I have been quite moved by this because of my personal experiences, but I will say again that that time has come that this needs to be discussed, and we need to compassionately care for our fellow man in any way that we can, and any way that we can, as a body, make it legal.
Senator Rabone is a cancer survivor himself. If the bill is passed into law, North Carolina doctors would be able to prescribe cannabis for PTSD, cancer, sickle cell anemia, glaucoma, ALS, and several other specific health problems. The governor of Louisiana on Tuesday signed a bill that lets patients in the state's medical cannabis program legally smoke whole plant cannabis flower. The legislation marks a notable expansion to the state's limited medical cannabis program. As it stands, patients are able to vaporize cannabis preparations via a metered dose inhaler, but they cannot access whole plant flower, and smoking is not allowed. This is the second piece of cannabis reform legislation that Governor John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, has signed this month. Last week, he gave the green light to a measure that decriminalizes the plant. Also from Marijuana Moment, the governor of Pennsylvania on Wednesday signed medical cannabis legislation that extends certain policies that were temporarily enacted during the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Under the legislation, cannabis curbside deliveries will continue, patients can obtain a 90-day rather than a 30-day supply for cannabis, and the cap on the number of patients that a caregiver can serve would also be removed indefinitely. While advocates are encouraged by these provisions being codified, they remain frustrated that the GOP-controlled legislature rejected an amendment from Senator Sharif Street, a Democrat, that would have allowed patients 21 and older to cultivate up to 5 plants for personal use. That would have marked a notable expansion of the state's existing program, through which cannabis is only available from dispensaries. Governor Jared Polis has signed an expansive bill that will add restrictions to Colorado's medical cannabis program and fund studies to research marijuana's impact on mental health. House Bill 1317 has sparked controversy since its introduction, but that didn't stop the measure from moving quickly through the Colorado legislature with little opposition from lawmakers. The proposal was billed as an attempt to curb youth use of extracted cannabis products, but medical cannabis advocates believe the new restrictions add unnecessary obstacles to patients and physicians. One such activist, Alexis Bortell, a medical cannabis refugee in Colorado, tells us exactly how this bill will affect her and other young medical cannabis patients, as well as every other patient in Colorado. Tell us about HB 1317 and why you came out to get it to be stopped and vetoed by the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis.
Well, it's just straight up discriminatory. I'm not sure why they would limit a certain age group to a certain cap of THC when they haven't even done the study or research that they're claiming to be biased to see if it's dangerous in the first place. And if that bill is funding the research, I'm not sure how that wouldn't bias it. Like, how is it going to be unbiased if they're funding it?
They have a predetermined goal that they want, and we know what happens with research and how it can be skewed and biased to the direction they want. So they already have a predetermined goal. And arbitrary limits, really, on age groups is one of the things you brought up in your speech. Tell us a little bit about that and the hypocrisy and the double standard behind that.
So really, it just boils down to it should be a matter between doctor and patient, and the doctor should be able to give the patient advice with the medicine. And unless the representative is going to the appointment with every single patient, I'm not sure why they should have a say and how much that patient should be able to have. It's really none of their business. Hear
the rest of the interview with Alexis right after the first hour of Controlled. Under the new law, medical cannabis physicians will be subject to requirements that involve providing a THC dosage amount and adding medical and mental health reviews for patients. The bill also limits medical cannabis concentrate purchases, and all medical marijuana transactions will be entered into a new state tracking system. From the California NORML blog, a victory for employees as the state personnel board rules that failing a urine test for marijuana is not proof of the employee's impairment or grounds for dismissal. Employees who are under federal drug testing mandates, like truck drivers, are not covered under the ruling, nor are those, quote, impaired or under the influence from marijuana, alcohol, or any other substance while at work or while on standby for work. It is intended to ensure a safe workplace, not to serve as a bar to marijuana use or alcohol consumption. This draws a distinction between a drug-free workforce and a drug-free workplace. The ruling concludes, quote, the board notes that it does not take a position on whether using marijuana is a good thing or a bad thing. It goes on to say, the voters have spoken and legalized it in the state of California. Given that reality, state agencies are powerless to discipline employees, like appellant, whose tests showed only that marijuana had been ingested or used sometime in the past, but that appellant was not under the influence of marijuana while on duty. The SPB ruling should protect most state employees against employment discrimination due to unwarranted drug tests, at least for inactive THC metabolites, as urine and hair testing does. Unfortunately, it won't protect government workers at the city or county levels, nor employees at private companies. Kicking off our failed policy headlines, U.S. track and field star Shacari Richardson is getting overwhelming support from her fellow athletes and the cannabis community after being suspended for 1 month after testing positive for THC. The result means she cannot compete in the 100-meter race at Tokyo Olympics. She was seen as the U.S.'s best contender for a gold medal in the event, and quite possibly the fastest woman in the country. She had this to say on the Today Show.
The charge and what the situation was marijuana. I'm not encouraging anybody to do it. I'm not saying, oh, don't do it or anything like that. But if you choose to do things in your personal time or things like that, you just should know or beware of the consequences, or just know, or just find different ways to just cope or do what it is that will make you feel better. But sitting here, I just say, don't judge me, because I am human. I'm you. I just happen to run a little faster.
On Friday, the White House refused to condemn the Olympic Committee in support of Sha'Carri. Surprising just about everyone, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas said Monday that the federal government's cannabis ban may not be necessary. His comments came as the Supreme Court declined to take up an appeal from a Colorado medical cannabis dispensary that was denied the federal tax breaks other industries are given. Thomas argued in his dissenting opinion that the top court's 2005 ruling to uphold federal cannabis prohibition may be outdated, given all the pro-cannabis policies that have been put into place over the past 16 years. Quote, once comprehensive, the federal government's current approach is a half-in, half-out regime that simultaneously tolerates and forbids local use of marijuana, Thomas wrote. This contradictory and unstable state of affairs strains basic principles of federalism and conceals traps for the unwary. Thomas concluded a prohibition on interstate use of cultivation of marijuana may no longer be necessary or proper to support the federal government's piecemeal approach. This comes on the heels of congressional Democrats defying Biden by scrapping his D.C. marijuana sales ban, and the reintroduction of the MORE Act by Representative Gerald Nadler, which would legalize cannabis federally. Dr. Dale Gieringer is executive director of California NORML, and he had this to say about federal legalization.
Federal descheduling is the big enchilada, and, it was a big breakthrough last year when the House of Representatives passed the MORE Act, which was a descheduling bill, amongst other things. It was a really comprehensive legalization bill. Of course, that bill did not proceed in the Senate. It looks like the same thing is likely to happen this year, too. The MORE Act is back. It had a good bipartisan majority last year in the House. But I don't see much prospects for it getting through the Senate given the 60-volt threshold, and given the fact there are actually a couple of Democrats who've said they're skeptical of descheduling, and some would prefer a more modest federal legalization bill that would maybe just make it legal in the states which decide to do it, but keep it like a Schedule I drug in states that don't do it. That kind of a bill actually would probably have broader bipartisan support, but it has complications of its own. So I fear that it's going to be a few years before this happens, especially because we also have a president who doesn't support that either, according to his words.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't swear that President Biden would veto a bill if it got through both chambers, but I doubt that will happen, and I doubt the Senate will support it without some vigorous support from the president. So we're stuck with this same two-track state legal, federal illegal situation for a while to come, I fear. The impact of the federal law is really bad on medical users in particular, but it's possible, I think it is definitely possible, that later on in this administration, we could see a federal rescheduling done by the executive, which is certainly within the power of the attorney general. And if they turn to that, then they could make cannabis Schedule 2 or 3. I mean, it really belongs in 3 if it's going to be rescheduled, because that's where dronabinol or marinol is scheduled now. Although I think Mr. Biden has talked about Schedule 2 previously, but either one is advantageous to medical patients because they can make a claim of medical legitimacy that will have some traction perhaps in hospitals and other places as well, although it doesn't really establish a legal distribution system, because you can't, if you have a Schedule 2 or Schedule 3 drug, you need an FDA approved drug to distribute, and nobody's close to doing an FDA approval for cannabis in the immediate future. But nonetheless, it would be an improvement if the federal government did that.
Well, now I've heard a few people we've talked to say that would mess with adult use, and it would basically because you'd have to basically have a prescription and with an FDA approved drug, so it may actually.
Well, at a federal level, but it's not at the state level. I mean,
so you still need those protections for the state in some type of codified law of the Cole memo, or the saying, hey, don't bother these states, something made, a federal law. Then you need banking's probably going to pass.
Well, banking is likely to pass, yes,
right,
because the bankers support it, and the Republicans will support the bankers and the money.
Yeah.
Catch the rest of Dale's interview in Hour 2 of Controlled. And now on to our booming future. Multiple adult use legalization laws took effect this week. And as of July 1st, 19 states have legalized cannabis, 4 of them in 2021 alone. Will Connecticut get it right, or will it be New Mexico? Laws legalizing the possession and use of cannabis by adults ages 21 or older have taken effect in Connecticut, New Mexico, and Virginia. This is covering an estimated 145 million Americans, or more than 40% of the country, living in a jurisdiction where the use of cannabis is legal by adults. The governor of Connecticut on Tuesday signed the bill legalizing marijuana, making them the 19th state to enact reform. Governor Ned Lamont has been broadly supportive of ending prohibition, but the path to get the legalization bill to his desk was rocky. Just as lawmakers were preparing to give the bill final passage, he threatened a veto over language on equity licensing that had been added, prompting legislators to revise it. Connecticut is the 4th state to legalize cannabis for adult use this year alone, following New York, Virginia, and New Mexico. New Mexico's cannabis legalization law took effect on Tuesday, with limited personal possession and cultivation officially becoming legal for adults 21 and older. People can now lawfully possess up to 2 ounces of cannabis, 16 grams of concentrates, and grow as many as 6 mature plants for personal use. But it will take some time before retail sales launch. In New Mexico, under a timeline published by the Cannabis Control Division, which falls under the State Department of Regulation and Licensing, regulators must establish an advisory committee, begin accepting certain cannabis business licenses no later than September 1st. In an effort to ensure medical patients can still access medicine after the adult use market opens, the bill allows the state to force licensed cannabis producers to reserve up to 10% of their products for patients in the event of a shortage or grow more plants to be used in medical products. As a new Phase 3 trial shows promising results for MDMA-assisted PTSD therapy when paired with talk therapy, California lawmakers have approved a bill to legalize psychedelic possession in committee. California Senator Scott Wiener is the sponsor of the bill and held a press conference at its passing.
Senate Bill 519 decriminalizes the possession and personal use of certain psychedelics, including psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, DMT, mescaline, and ibogaine, only for people 21 and older. Mental health is a critical reason to decriminalize psychedelics. But let's be clear that there's another reason, and that is that the racist war on drugs, which has fueled mass incarceration and torn apart communities, particularly communities of color, but not made us any safer, the war on drugs needs to end. For 50 years, we've taken the approach to drug use of just incarcerating as many people as possible, and we have had no benefit from that approach, but it's been very expensive and very destructive to communities. This bill is one step in the direction of ending the failed war on drugs.